Learn English through story. And today, we travel across centuries, from small farms in tropical mountains to global corporations and international markets. How did coffee become one of the most powerful products in the world? In this documentary story, you will learn real history, clear facts, strong vocabulary, global economics, in simple B1 English. Listen carefully. Notice how trade, power, and climate all connect in one cup of coffee. And remember, there is a quiz waiting for you in the first comment. At the end of the video, answer the questions. Earn your stars. Show your understanding. If you are serious about improving your English, subscribe now and join our WhatsApp channel to stay connected with the Woo English learning community. Let's begin the journey. Chapter 1. The First Written Evidence, 15th Century Yemen. Coffee did not begin as a global industry. It did not begin as a symbol of wealth. It began as a plant. The coffee plant grows naturally in the highlands of East Africa. Botanical research confirms that Coffea arabica originated in what is now Ethiopia. This is supported by scientific studies of plant genetics. However, the story of coffee as a drink does not begin with written records in Ethiopia. The first clear historical evidence appears in Yemen. In the 15th century, Yemen was an active center of trade and religious learning. It was connected to the Red Sea trade routes. Merchants moved goods between Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and the wider Islamic world. During this period, Sufi religious communities played an important role in society. Sufis practiced long night prayers. They needed to remain awake for many hours. Historical sources from this time describe a drink made from roasted coffee beans. The beans were dried, roasted over heat, crushed, and boiled in water. The result was a dark liquid. This drink helped people stay alert. It improved concentration. Written documents from Yemen describe the use of coffee in religious settings. These texts are considered the earliest reliable evidence of coffee as a beverage. This is why historians identify Yemen, not Ethiopia, as the first organized center of coffee drinking. There is a well-known legend about a goat herder who discovered coffee after noticing his animals becoming energetic. However, this story does not appear in early historical records. It was written down centuries later. Modern historians do not consider it factual evidence. Serious academic research relies on documented sources. In Yemen, coffee became known as kahwa. At first, its use was limited to religious communities. But this did not last. The port city of Mocha became central to coffee trade. Mocha was located on the Red Sea. It connected Yemen to international shipping routes. From Mocha, coffee beans were exported to other parts of the Islamic world. By the late 15th century, coffee was present in cities such as Mecca and Cairo. These cities were important religious and commercial centers. Travelers, merchants, and scholars moved between them. Coffee traveled with them. In the early 16th century, coffee houses began to appear. These places were called kahve khane. They were public spaces. People gathered there to talk, read, and exchange information. Coffee houses quickly became part of urban culture. Some religious leaders supported coffee. They believed it helped concentration during prayer. Others were concerned. They worried about large public gatherings. In some cities, authorities attempted to ban coffee. These bans did not last. Coffee consumption continued to grow. It spread across the Ottoman Empire. It moved to Istanbul. It reached North Africa. It became part of daily life in many regions. This early expansion was not accidental. It followed existing trade networks. The Red Sea connected Yemen to Egypt. Caravan routes connected cities across the Arabian Peninsula. Merchants played a key role. They saw that coffee had commercial value. Demand increased steadily. At this stage, coffee was still a regional product. Production was limited. Yemen controlled most of the export supply. For many years, Yemen attempted to protect its monopoly. Farmers often boiled the beans before export. This prevented foreign growers from planting fertile seeds. But economic control never lasts forever. Other regions would eventually begin cultivation. That transformation would change global history. In the 15th century, however, coffee remained closely linked to Yemen. It was part of religious life. It was part of trade. It was part of social interaction. The historical record is clear. Coffee as a documented beverage begins in Yemen, not as a legend, not as a myth, but as a recorded practice in written sources. This is the true starting point of the global coffee story. From the mountains of East Africa to the ports of the Red Sea, coffee began its documented journey, and the world would never be the same again. Chapter 2: Coffee and the Islamic World, 16th Century Expansion. In the early 16th century, coffee was no longer limited to Yemen. It had begun to spread across the Islamic world. This expansion did not happen suddenly. It followed established trade routes. It moved with merchants, pilgrims, and scholars. The city of Mecca played an important role. Every year, thousands of pilgrims traveled there. They came from North Africa, Egypt, Persia, and Anatolia. Many of them encountered coffee for the first time during their journey. They observed how it was prepared. They experienced its effects. They carried this knowledge back to their home regions. By the early 1500s, coffee was present in major cities such as Mecca and Cairo. Cairo was one of the largest urban centers of the time. It was a center of learning, religion, and commerce. Historical records from Cairo describe public places where coffee was served. These were early coffee houses. They became spaces for discussion and social interaction. Men gathered to talk about religion, politics, and trade. They listened to poetry. They played board games. They exchanged news. Coffee houses offered something new. Unlike taverns, they did not serve alcohol. This made them acceptable to many religious authorities. At the same time, their popularity created concern. Large gatherings of people could become politically sensitive. In Mecca, local authorities attempted to ban coffee in 1511. They claimed that coffee might cause social disorder. However, the ban did not last. Scholars examined the issue. They concluded that coffee did not violate religious law. The prohibition was removed. Similar debates appeared in other cities. In Cairo, officials also questioned the influence of coffee houses, yet the drink continued to spread. By the mid-16th century, coffee had reached Istanbul. In 1554, the first recorded coffee house opened there. Istanbul was the capital of the Ottoman Empire. It connected Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. This made it a powerful center for cultural exchange. Coffee houses in Istanbul became important public institutions. They were known as places of conversation. Some historians describe them as early forms of public forums. Writers and intellectuals met there. Merchants negotiated agreements. Ordinary citizens shared information. The expansion of coffee during this period was supported by trade networks. The Red Sea connected Yemen to Egypt. Caravan routes crossed the Arabian Peninsula. The Ottoman Empire controlled vast territories. This political structure helped coffee move efficiently across regions. At the same time, Yemen continued to protect its position in the coffee market. Mocha remained the primary export port. European merchants began to purchase coffee there. However, cultivation outside Yemen was still limited. For much of the 16th century, Yemen maintained strong influence over supply. Coffee was now more than a religious aid. It was part of daily urban life. It influenced social habits. It changed patterns of public gathering. In many cities, coffee houses operated late into the night. They provided light, conversation, and stimulation. Some religious leaders supported coffee. They appreciated its practical benefits. It helped students remain alert. It helped scholars focus on study. Others remained cautious. They worried about uncontrolled discussion. Authorities sometimes monitored coffee houses, but complete prohibition proved impossible. Demand continued to grow. Coffee became integrated into the economic system of the region. It generated revenue through taxation and trade. It supported farmers in Yemen. It supported merchants across the empire. By the end of the 16th century, coffee was firmly established across the Islamic world. Its spread was not based on myth. It was based on documented trade, urban growth, and social practice. The expansion from Yemen to Mecca, Cairo, and Istanbul represents the first major stage of globalization for coffee. It moved across borders. It entered new cultures. It adapted to different societies. This period created the foundation for the next transformation. Soon, European merchants would increase their involvement. New trade routes would open. Cultivation would expand beyond Yemen. But in the 16th century, the Islamic world shaped coffee's early development. It transformed a regional drink into a structured urban institution. The coffee house became a recognizable feature of city life. The drink became associated with conversation and intellectual activity. And the commercial value of coffee continued to rise. From the port of Mocha, to the streets of Cairo, to the coffee houses of Istanbul, coffee had begun its international journey. Its influence was growing steadily, and the next stage of expansion would take it even further. Chapter 3. Coffee arrives in Europe. 17th century trade routes. By the early 17th century, coffee had already become established across the Ottoman Empire. European merchants were aware of its growing popularity. They observed its commercial value. They recognized its economic potential. Trade between Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean was active during this period. Venice played a central role. Venetian merchants traded regularly with Ottoman ports. They imported spices, textiles, and other goods. Coffee was added to this list. The first documented coffee shipments reached Venice in the early 1600s. At first, coffee was considered unusual. It was dark in color. It had a strong, bitter taste. Many Europeans were unfamiliar with it. Some religious authorities expressed concern. Because coffee came from the Islamic world, it was viewed with suspicion. There were debates about whether it should be accepted. However, after examination, no official ban was established. Consumption slowly increased. Coffee began to appear in other European cities. In England, the first coffee house opened in Oxford in 1650. 2 years later, a coffee house opened in London. These establishments offered a new kind of public space. They were different from taverns. Alcohol was not the main product. Coffee houses attracted merchants, writers, and professionals. Customers paid a small entrance fee. In exchange, they received a cup of coffee and access to newspapers. Discussion became central to these spaces. People debated politics. They exchanged commercial information. They discussed scientific discoveries. For this reason, some historians later described English coffee houses as penny universities. This term reflected their educational atmosphere. In France, coffee also gained popularity. By the late 17th century, Paris had established several coffee houses. They became centers for literary and philosophical discussion. Intellectual life increasingly included these meeting places. Writers and thinkers gathered to share ideas. Coffee supported long conversations. It provided stimulation without intoxication. Vienna encountered coffee during a different historical moment. In 1683, after the Battle of Vienna, Ottoman supplies were left behind. Among these supplies were coffee beans. Soon after, coffee houses appeared in the city. They became part of Austrian urban culture. Across Europe, coffee houses followed a similar pattern. They offered printed news. They encouraged conversation. They allowed social interaction between different professional groups. Merchants used them to exchange market information. Investors discussed trade opportunities. Insurance businesses and financial institutions sometimes began in these settings. Coffee played an indirect role in commercial development. The growth of coffee in Europe depended on maritime trade. Ships carried beans from Ottoman ports to Mediterranean cities. From there, goods moved north through established trade networks. The expansion of European colonial activity also influenced supply. European powers sought to reduce dependence on Yemeni exports. By the late 17th century, efforts began to cultivate coffee in overseas colonies. This marked a shift in control. Coffee was no longer limited to the Red Sea region. European demand continued to increase. Urban populations were expanding. Printing presses were producing newspapers. Scientific societies were forming. Coffee houses provided a space where these developments connected. In England, some coffee houses specialized. Certain locations became known for shipping news. Others became associated with financial discussion. Over time, organized institutions emerged from these environments. Coffee itself remained a commodity. But its social impact was significant. It encouraged alertness. It supported literacy. It created regular gathering spaces. Unlike alcohol-based establishments, coffee houses were often open during the day. This made them suitable for business meetings. Some governments monitored these locations. Authorities were aware that public discussion could influence opinion. At times, temporary restrictions were introduced. However, widespread prohibition did not succeed. Coffee had already become integrated into European urban life. By the end of the 17th century, coffee consumption was established in major cities including London, Paris, Vienna, and Amsterdam. Trade volumes increased steadily. European merchants began to invest directly in cultivation abroad. This decision would transform the global structure of the coffee economy. What began as a regional beverage in Yemen had now entered European commercial networks. The movement was driven by trade. It was supported by urban growth. It was strengthened by intellectual culture. Coffee's arrival in Europe did not happen through legend. It occurred through documented trade records, shipping logs, and urban accounts. This stage marked the beginning of a new phase. Control over production would soon shift. Colonial systems would expand cultivation. Global competition would intensify. But in the 17th century, Europe experienced coffee first as an imported curiosity, then as a daily habit, and finally as a foundation for new forms of public life. The journey from Ottoman ports to European capitals changed the scale of coffee consumption. Its transformation into a truly global commodity was now underway. Chapter 4: Colonial Plantations and Global Production. 18th to 19th century expansion. By the late 17th century, European demand for coffee was increasing steadily. Urban populations were growing. Coffee houses were multiplying. Imports from Yemen were no longer sufficient. European powers began to search for new sources of production. This decision marked a turning point. Coffee cultivation would move from the Red Sea region to overseas colonies. The Dutch were among the first to act. In the late 1600s, they obtained coffee plants. They transported them to their colony in Java, in present-day Indonesia. By the early 18th century, Java had become an important producer. Coffee from this region entered European markets through Dutch trade networks. The success of Dutch cultivation demonstrated a new possibility. Coffee could be grown outside Yemen. This reduced Yemeni control over supply. It also increased competition. The French followed a similar path. In the early 18th century, coffee plants were transported to the Caribbean. Martinique became an early center of French cultivation. From there, coffee spread to other Caribbean islands. Plantations expanded rapidly. The Portuguese played a decisive role in Brazil. Coffee was introduced there in the early 18th century. Over time, Brazil became the largest coffee producer in the world. By the 19th century, Brazilian production dominated global markets. The shift from small-scale farming in Yemen to large colonial plantations changed the structure of the coffee economy. Plantations required land, labor, and capital. European colonial systems provided these elements. Large areas of land were cleared. Coffee trees were planted in organized rows. Production was designed for export, not local consumption. Labor systems varied by region. In the Caribbean and Brazil, enslaved labor played a major role during the 18th and early 19th centuries. Millions of enslaved Africans were transported to the Americas through the Atlantic slave trade. Many were forced to work on coffee plantations. Conditions were harsh. Work was physically demanding. Mortality rates were high. The connection between coffee and slavery is a documented historical reality. After the abolition of slavery in the 19th century, other labor systems replaced it. In Brazil, migrant workers from Europe and later from Japan were recruited. In Southeast Asia, local labor systems operated under colonial supervision. Production volumes continued to increase. Transportation technology improved during the 19th century. Steamships reduced travel time. Railways connected plantations to ports. These developments lowered costs and expanded distribution. Coffee was now integrated into global industrial trade. International commodity markets began to influence pricing. Prices fluctuated depending on harvest conditions, political stability, and global demand. Coffee became part of a larger capitalist system. Financial institutions provided credit to plantation owners. Export revenues supported colonial economies. By the mid-19th century, coffee was one of the most traded agricultural products in the world. Brazil's dominance was especially significant. Large estates, known as fazendas, produced vast quantities. Production scale created economic concentration. Wealth accumulated among plantation owners and export merchants. At the same time, workers often received limited compensation. The colonial plantation model emphasized efficiency and volume. Environmental impact increased. Forests were cleared. Soil conditions changed. Monoculture farming created vulnerability to disease. In some regions, coffee crops were destroyed by plant infections. This exposed the risks of relying on a single export commodity. Despite these risks, global consumption continued to rise. In Europe and North America, coffee became part of daily life. Industrial roasting facilities emerged. Packaging improved preservation. Urban demand strengthened the production system. The balance of power had shifted. Yemen no longer controlled global supply. European colonial empires and later independent nations such as Brazil dominated production. Coffee was now a fully global commodity. Its journey from religious communities in Yemen to massive plantations in Brazil reflects broader patterns of colonial expansion. Trade networks expanded across oceans. Labor systems were reorganized. Economic structures were transformed. The 18th and 19th centuries reshaped coffee into a foundation of global commerce. This transformation was not accidental. It was driven by demand, profit incentives, and imperial power. The plantation system defined this era. It increased output dramatically. It connected continents economically. It also created social inequality and environmental pressure. By the end of the 19th century, the global coffee economy had achieved industrial scale. Production centers were located primarily in tropical colonies. Consumption centers were located mainly in Europe and North America. This division would shape international trade patterns for generations. Coffee had moved far from its early role in Sufi communities. It was no longer limited to regional markets. It had become a pillar of global production. And the forces of industrialization would soon introduce another stage of transformation. Chapter 5: Industrialization and Corporate Control. 21st Century Transformation. By the beginning of the 20th century, coffee was already a global commodity. Production was concentrated in tropical regions. Consumption was highest in Europe and North America. The next transformation would not come from new colonies. It would come from industrialization. Technological change reshaped the coffee industry. Large roasting facilities replaced small local roasters. Industrial machines processed large quantities of beans. Standardization improved consistency. Packaging methods advanced. Vacuum sealing extended shelf life. Coffee could now travel longer distances without losing quality. Transportation also improved. Steamships had already reduced travel time in the 19th century. In the 20th century, motorized shipping and rail networks expanded further. Ports modernized. Distribution became more efficient. These developments supported large-scale trade. At the same time, corporate structures began to dominate the industry. Companies invested in branding. They created recognizable names and packaging designs. Marketing campaigns influenced consumer habits. Coffee was no longer only a product. It became an identity. In the United States, major roasting companies expanded nationally. Supermarkets replaced many small shops. Consumers purchased packaged coffee for home use. Advertising emphasized freshness, strength, and flavor. Radio and later television promoted brands directly to households. Corporate consolidation increased during this period. Smaller firms were acquired by larger companies. Ownership became concentrated. Control over supply chains expanded. A supply chain includes farming, transport, processing, packaging, and retail. Large corporations attempted to manage each stage. This vertical integration reduced costs and increased profit margins. Financial institutions played a role in expansion. Banks provided credit for infrastructure. Commodity exchanges influenced pricing. Coffee futures contracts allowed traders to speculate on future supply. Prices were increasingly connected to global financial markets. The 20th century also witnessed geopolitical change. 2 world wars disrupted trade routes. Shipping risks increased. Governments sometimes intervened in agricultural markets. In response to price instability, producing countries formed cooperative agreements. One example was the International Coffee Agreement, first established in 1962. Its goal was to stabilize prices and protect producer income. The agreement used export quotas. It limited how much coffee each country could sell. This system reduced extreme price fluctuations for several decades. However, the agreement eventually weakened in the late 20th century. When quotas ended, price volatility returned. Market competition intensified. Another major change was the rise of instant coffee. In the early 20th century, new processing techniques allowed coffee to be dried into soluble powder. This innovation increased convenience. Consumers could prepare coffee quickly. During wartime, instant coffee became popular among soldiers. After the wars, it entered civilian markets. Convenience influenced consumption patterns. Later in the century, a different trend appeared. Specialty coffee shops expanded in urban centers. Companies focused on atmosphere and experience. Coffee became associated with lifestyle. Premium pricing strategies emerged. The product was no longer sold only as a basic necessity. It was marketed as quality and culture. At the production level, economic inequality remained significant. Farmers in producing countries often received a small share of final retail prices. Middlemen and corporations captured larger margins. This imbalance created debate. Fair trade movements began to promote more equitable compensation. Certification systems developed. Consumers were encouraged to consider ethical sourcing. The 20th century coffee industry was defined by scale, industrial roasting, global shipping, corporate branding, financial integration, regulatory agreements. The system became complex. It connected farmers in tropical regions with consumers in global cities. It linked agriculture with finance. It combined tradition with technology. Coffee companies operated across borders. Multinational corporations established offices in multiple countries. Decision-making was centralized. Marketing strategies were coordinated internationally. By the end of the 20th century, a small number of large corporations controlled a significant portion of the global market. Competition remained strong, but market concentration increased. The transformation from plantation-based export commodity to corporate-managed consumer product was complete. Coffee had entered the modern industrial economy. Its production relied on mechanization and logistics. Its distribution depended on global supply chains. Its pricing was influenced by financial markets. Its image was shaped by advertising. The 20th century did not change the plant itself, but it changed everything around it. Control shifted from colonial plantation owners to corporate executives. Profit strategies replaced imperial expansion. The global coffee system became structured by industry, finance, and branding. This transformation prepared the industry for the 21st century. A century defined by globalization, digital communication, and new consumer expectations. The story of coffee was no longer only about geography. It was about corporate power, economic coordination, and international systems of trade. Chapter 6, The Modern Coffee Economy, 21st Century Challenges and Sustainability. In the 21st century, coffee remains one of the most traded agricultural products in the world. It is grown in more than 70 countries. Most production takes place in tropical regions across Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Consumption remains concentrated in North America, Europe, and parts of East Asia. The structure of the global coffee economy reflects historical patterns. Producing countries export raw beans. Consuming countries import, roast, brand, and retail the final product. This division continues to shape global income distribution. One of the main challenges facing the modern coffee industry is price volatility. Coffee prices are determined on international commodity exchanges. They respond to supply levels, weather conditions, political instability, and currency fluctuations. When harvests are strong, global supply increases. Prices often decline. When droughts, disease, or political disruptions reduce output, prices rise. For farmers, this creates uncertainty. Many small-scale producers depend heavily on coffee for income. They may lack financial reserves. When prices fall below production costs, livelihoods are threatened. Climate change presents another major challenge. Coffee plants are sensitive to temperature and rainfall patterns. Rising global temperatures affect suitable growing zones. In some regions, higher altitudes are becoming necessary for quality production. Extreme weather events, such as droughts and heavy rains, damage crops. Plant diseases have also increased in frequency. One example is coffee leaf rust, a fungal infection that reduces yield. Climate adaptation strategies are now being studied. Researchers examine resistant plant varieties. Agricultural extension programs provide training in sustainable practices. Diversification is encouraged. Farmers are advised not to rely exclusively on one crop. The concept of sustainability has gained importance. Sustainability includes environmental protection, economic stability, and social responsibility. Organizations promote certification systems. Labels such as fair trade and organic aim to improve transparency. Fair trade programs attempt to guarantee minimum prices for farmers. They also encourage community development projects. However, certification systems are not without criticism. Some analysts argue that benefits are unevenly distributed. Others note that certification fees can create additional costs. Large corporations continue to influence the structure of the market. Multinational companies control roasting, branding, and retail chains. They negotiate contracts with producers and exporters. Global supply chains remain complex. Beans may travel across continents before reaching consumers. Digital technology now plays a role. Price information spreads quickly through online platforms. Financial markets respond instantly to global events. Consumers are also changing. Demand for specialty coffee has increased. Many consumers now care about origin, production methods, and ethical sourcing. Traceability systems allow buyers to identify the region or farm where coffee was grown. This has created opportunities for premium pricing. Small producers who meet quality standards may receive higher returns. At the same time, inequality remains significant. The final retail price of coffee in urban cafes can be many times higher than the price paid to farmers. Distribution of value along the supply chain remains uneven. Producing countries often capture a smaller share of total profit. International policy discussions continue. Some governments support stabilization mechanisms. Development agencies invest in rural infrastructure. Education programs aim to strengthen farmer organizations. Cooperatives allow small producers to negotiate collectively. Access to credit remains an important issue. Without financing, farmers struggle to invest in equipment or climate adaptation. The 21st century coffee economy operates within a globalized system. Trade agreements influence tariffs and export rules. Currency exchange rates affect competitiveness. Transportation networks connect remote farms to international markets. Logistics efficiency determines delivery speed and cost. Despite technological progress, coffee remains dependent on agricultural labor. Millions of small farmers continue to cultivate beans by hand. Their work connects directly to global consumption patterns. The modern coffee system is both advanced and vulnerable. It benefits from digital communication and global distribution. It remains exposed to environmental risk and market instability. The challenge of the 21st century is balance. Balance between profit and fairness, between efficiency and sustainability, between global trade and local livelihoods. Coffee began as a regional beverage. It became a colonial export. It transformed into an industrial commodity. Today, it stands at the center of debates about climate, equity, and global responsibility. The plant has not changed, but the system surrounding it continues to evolve. The future of coffee will depend on cooperation between producers, corporations, governments, and consumers. Its history demonstrates adaptation. Its future will require coordination. In a global economy defined by connection and interdependence, coffee remains a symbol of how agriculture, trade, and society intersect. From small farms in tropical regions to cafes in global cities, the journey continues. The modern coffee economy is not a finished story. It is an ongoing process shaped by environmental realities, economic forces, and human decision-making. Today, you did not only learn about coffee. You learned about trade, power, colonial history, corporations, and sustainability. Now go to the first comment. Test your understanding. Earn your stars. If you want more real documentary stories in clear English, subscribe now and continue your journey with us.